as you start lifting heavier and heavier and advance in your lifting career, the problem of joint pain starts to become more and more prevalent. In this video, I will go over 6 ways to fix joint pain to get those gains with less joint pains. The list is structured from what's usually best to try first, down to the last option, which is more of a card you pull when everything else fails. Keep in mind though, it's only a general order of importance. There are situations where I'll actually use the last one first, so don't put too much weight on the order. Number 1 is fixing muscle imbalances. A good example of this is wrist and elbow pain from having overpowering wrist flexors and weak wrist extensors. I myself have dealt with this problem in the past. I had a training partner with the same problem, and both our wrist pains went away once we started doing wrist extensions. There's no joint in your body that's completely free from the risk of pain caused by a muscle imbalance. So if you haven't looked up what muscle imbalances can cause pain in the particular joint that you feel pain in, check it out. Number 2 is building strength in deep ranges. 2 years ago, I was dealing with some pain in my shoulders while pressing, so I decided to cut the range of motion on most presses short, so I could do the same amount of volume without taxing my shoulders as much. It reduced my pains, but my chest gains suffered. I didn't make much progress in my chest during that period, and every time I would accidentally go deeper than the half-rep benchmark that I put for myself, my life flashed before my eyes. I had become so weak in that deep position that I couldn't even do deep dips with my body weight. One day I recognized that it was a problem and decided to do something about it. I went from repping 40 kilos to the 15s on the incline dumbbell press and slowly built myself up, only adding 2.5 kilos every 1 or 2 weeks depending on how I felt. Now I can go way deeper without pain, and my chest has grown a lot since incorporating this new technique. And I bet if I went back to the half reps, I could do even more volume from building up real resilience in my shoulders. I don't do all my chest work super deep, that's too much stress on the shoulders, but I keep at least one chest movement in my program where I go super deep to maintain my joint resilience. However, there's one caveat to this approach. Some people claim that you can get used to any movement and no movement is inherently dangerous, but if you've been doing some movement for a while with the purpose of building strength in deep ranges, but you can't build up to working weights without pain, no matter how slowly you build up, just drop it. Every movement that you do with pain is taxing your joint recovery of the joint that you feel pain in significantly more than movements that you do pain-free, resulting in a net negative on your joint recovery. If there's no progression to less pain over time, the movement is clearly not doing the job you intended for it. Number 3 is more exercise variety. You don't want too little variation, because repeating the same movement stresses the same tissues in the exact same way, without enough variation and recovery, leading to microscopic damage that accumulates into overuse injuries. Some people don't use much variation but rotate exercises frequently to combat overuse problems. I wouldn't recommend doing that in that way unless 3 weeks never pass between hitting an exercise in your exercise arsenal again, or your training conjugate or something like that, where the variations are so similar that you aren't really losing the muscle memory to do the exercises. If you stop doing an exercise, your muscles start to forget how to lift in the most efficient way with that exercise. So when you come back to the exercise, you have to spend a period of time regaining strength, which only comes from your body relearning how to perform the exercise, not real muscle growth. And because you aren't lifting the weight in the most efficient way, the target muscles aren't taken as close to their limits. If you're advanced, that could mean that the exercise in question isn't driving progress until you regain your ability to push it in the most effective way. It's possible to take it too far, where some people let their fear of losing the ability to perform exercises severely limit their exercise selection. And I wouldn't recommend adding shit exercises just for the sake of exercise variety either. There's a balance. What I do and I recommend is to have as much variety as you can with quality exercises and 2 sets per exercise. Doing only 1 set per exercise is a lot of warming up per session, which can become pretty tedious. I've found that 2 sets on most exercises is a good balance between having variety and not having to waste too much time warming up or waiting for a machine. In my plan, there are only 5 exercises out of 40 that I myself do 2 times a week, and 9 exercises that I only do for a single set, and none that I do for more than 2. Number 4 is doing more shortened biased movements. Having everything lengthened biased seems to be the craze right now, but lengthened biased movements are in most cases much more taxing on your joints and ligaments. If joint fatigue is what's limiting you, swapping some of your lengthened biased movements with shortened biased ones will in most cases alleviate some of your joint pain without much drop in stimulus. Number 5 is lowering frequency. Higher frequencies are very stressful on the joints. So if you're training a body part 3 times a week with low volume, you could try dropping it down to 2 times a week frequency and increase your volume a bit per day. Even if you're doing high volume and 3 times a week frequency, the decreased joint fatigue could allow you to push harder and get more stimulus out of each set. And although overall volume dropped, it could still result in a net gain of stimulus because you're pushing your sets harder. I would generally prescribe lowering frequency if you're doing more than 2 times a week frequency for a certain body part. Alex Leonidas, for example, trained chest every 5 days, pushing to his new bench PR of 405 at 181 pound body weight because higher frequencies were too much on his joints. You might be in the same boat as him, but I would explore other options before dropping under 2 times a week frequencies. Number 6 is lowering volume. There are 2 scenarios where too much volume can cause joint pain. Let's start with the first one, having too many exercises stressing a single joint. Let's say that you only work your chest and shoulders with compounds, so you're doing loads of pressing, whether it's vertical, incline, or horizontal, you're doing loads of every kind. Then you're also training arms very hard, doing loads of overhead work and skull crushers. It wouldn't surprise me that that person would have elbow pain. His elbows are under high volumes of stress, doing all the pressing and arm work. It's a double whammy of elbow extermination. The first thing this person could try is switch some of his compound presses to isolation exercises like flies, lateral raises, or front raises. These isolation exercises are a lot more elbow friendly than most presses and alleviate the overall stress on the elbows. If that doesn't work, that person could ask himself if all the volume he's doing is really necessary, and if he could reduce the volume even further by slashing out some of the pressing volume without replacing it with something else, and see if he's still making progress with the reduced volume. Too much stress on any joint results in pain, whether it's elbows, wrists, hips, shoulders, or knees. But there's also such a thing of doing too much overall volume that can lead to pain. If your training is relatively balanced, but most of your joints are feeling achy, it could have stemmed from too much overall volume. Energy being allocated to recovery can become so limited from overall stress that your joint recovery starts to suffer. Your joints can therefore become more sensitive overall as you do more overall volume. You could, for example, get increased shoulder pain on your lateral raises from adding a bunch of leg volume, although you didn't add any volume that was aggravating the shoulders. A big sign of this is if you show up to your workouts and you're dragging yourself through the whole thing with most joints feeling achy or sensitive. Reducing overall volume could be the most logical step to alleviate some of that pain. And finally, we end with number 7, slowing down your tempo. This is definitely my least favorite fix. Slowing down your tempo makes a lighter weight harder so you can get more out of less weight. And a fast negative swiftly turned into a forceful positive can also be pretty taxing on your joints, because you're saving all your energy to push the hardest where you're typically the most vulnerable. I use slow negatives on a few movements like RDLs and movements that I'm trying to build strength in deep ranges or new exercises, but an excessively slow tempo just makes you tired and reduces your ability to push your muscles to their absolute limit. It's a tool like every trick mentioned before and has its place in hypertrophy programming. But in most cases, this should be the last card you pull if everything else fails. I'm adding mobility here as the bonus eighth. I don't know much about mobility training, and it may not differ much from number 5 or be useful at all joint fatigue wise, but I got myself a mobility coach and I've gained a lot of flexibility and mobility in just 1 month. Currently, I haven't gained any joint resilience, but I've got a lot more mobility to gain. I'm very sensitive to elbow, shoulder, wrist, and knee pain, and consequently, I'm very stiff in my quads, triceps, shoulders, and wrists. But I'm more putting it out there as a potential fix that I'm currently trying out. I feel like the topic of joint fatigue management isn't much discussed among lifters. So I hope you learned something new that will benefit your joints and gains. I usually don't make videos this long, but I've still got a lot more to say on this topic. So drop a comment down below if you're interested in more on this topic. Thank you for watching to the very end, and I hope I'll see you in the next one. Peace.